Hello guys, Michelle here and welcome back to my channel. In this video I'm going to be covering off everything that you need to know about road walking on Te Araroa. From the many other long distance trails in the world, Te Araroa is one of the newer ones, and this means that you have to deal with some things on Te Araroa that you just don't have to deal with anywhere else. One of these is road walking. There's absolutely no doubt that on Te Araroa you are going to have to deal with large portions of the trail being on or along road. And in fact, on the 1700 kilometers that I hiked of the North Island section of Te Araroa last summer, I've calculated roughly 760 kilometers of those to be either on a road, which is paved or sealed, or along some kind of hard surface that basically is a road. This equates to roughly 45% of the total kilometers in the North Island, which is a substantial chunk of what you're going to be doing on Te Araroa. So why is there so much road walking on Te Araroa? Well, quite simply, it's because it's such a new trail. In fact, when trail founder Jeff Chappell won a fellowship in 2000 to go and experience some of the other long distance trails in the world, he realized that many of them were formed on handshake agreements and gaining access through private land that belongs to private landowners. And this can be quite fickle at times, especially with landowners granting and revoking access at their own will. So this means that large sections of the trail often have to be rerouted around public access facilities such as roads. And in fact, this kind of history for long distance trails is not uncommon. In fact, the Appalachian Trail on the east coast of the United States of America was formed in exactly this way. It was basically started on those same kinds of handshake agreements, and long sections of the trail were originally routed down roadways. The problem with Te Araroa is that it is being held up in the same regard as some of the long distance trails in the US in particular, and there is this comparison being made on a constant basis between the kind of hiking you can do, say on the US trails, and the kind of hiking that is possible on Te Araroa. So it is important to remember, if you are thinking about hiking Te Araroa, that it is a very new trail and that it is likely to remain that way for at least the next 5 to 10 years. And of course we have the issue in New Zealand that a lot of the trail is routed through private farmland, and those farmland access agreements are likely to change on a regular basis, especially just during the course of the year when things like lambing enclosures might affect where the trail passes through. At the moment, the Te Araroa Trust, which administers the Te Araroa Trail, says that around about 12% of the trail is actually routed along the road. As I mentioned at the start of this video, that's not quite what my calculations come out to. I think it might be something to do with how they actually define road walking sections when they're making those calculations. But regardless, their projections going forward is that they want to reduce the amount of road walking on Te Araroa to 10% of the distance of the trail, which at the current time would equate to around about 300 kilometers. Now later on in this video I'm going to be covering off all the things that you need to know about how to hike safely on the road here on Te Araroa, and I'm also going to be telling you the sections that in my opinion were the most dangerous and that you may want to consider skipping if you're a little bit nervous about it. But for right now, what I'm going to cover off is some of the positive aspects of the road walking sections of Te Araroa. So first and foremost, the road walking sections actually do hold a specific advantage, especially in the North Island, because it often means that it takes you through small settlements on a regular basis. And for those people who are used to having to plan a lot of resupply boxes for long distance through hikes, it means that they don't have to plan that aspect of their hike quite so much. In fact, it means that they can pretty much pick up food supplies on a very regular basis, usually anywhere between 1 to 3 days. Now of course, having much shorter distances between your resupply food stops and not having to carry 6 to 7 days worth of food is especially important for the beginners amongst us who are just getting used to hiking long distances with a lot of weight on our backs. But it also means that you can be a lot more flexible with your food choices. One of the things that is often talked about in the thru-hiker circles is how if you plan a lot of your food a long way ahead, chances are you're going to be sick of a lot of it by the time you've hit week 2 or 3 of your thru hike. If you're able to supply yourself a lot more regularly along the way, then it means that you're able to swap out the things that you're just not feeling at that particular time and pick up some different options and keep that variety there. Another big advantage that that a lot of people often miss is that when you're walking on the road, because it is generally a much flatter surface with a much gentler grade, you're able to maintain a much faster hiking pace than you would on a trail section. So for example, I found that often I was able to maintain anywhere between 4.5 to 5 kilometers an hour if I was hiking on a road, versus in some sections of the North Island hiking through trails where it could take me an hour or more to do 2 kilometers. Sometimes it's nice, especially if you're on a bit of a boring section, to be able to churn through those kilometers on a faster basis. And finally, one of the great things about road walking, which I didn't really start to appreciate until I got at least halfway down the North Island, is that it allows you to meet otherwise unknown trail angels along the way. What do I mean by this? Well, I mean the people that just randomly stop and offer to give you a ride on the side of the road. Now, hitchhiking on Te Araroa is a little bit of a controversial issue. Some people enjoy doing it and think it's completely safe. Other people have had strange experiences and they don't recommend doing it by yourself. As a Kiwi, I would definitely say that you are a lot safer hitchhiking in New Zealand than you are anywhere else in the world, but that doesn't mean that you're not necessarily going to come across a strange person who maybe you shouldn't be getting in the car with. For me personally, I overcame this by making sure that anytime I did decide to hitchhike on the trail, I was with at least one other hiker, and we sort of used the strength in numbers mentality. And on the very few occasions that I did hitchhike on the North Island, often I came to really enjoy the experience. I was amazed at how often it was that I would be sitting somewhere absolutely desperate to get a ride because my legs just wouldn't carry me any further, and somebody would just turn up out of the blue and offer us a ride to wherever we needed to go. This just seemed to be how the trail worked, and it gave me a much broader definition of exactly who or what a trail angel could be. Even if you decide you don't want to go with hitchhiking, the community surrounding Te Araroa has recognised that because there are such long sections of road walking, especially on the North Island, hikers are probably going to need some kind of assistance to get from one trail to the next if they are not wanting to do the road walk. And so I found that along the way there was generally always 1 or 2 trail angels in those locations where there was a large road walk coming up who were quite happy to transport you from one end of the trail to the next. Sometimes there would be a small fee involved in doing this, but I think that that is a very small price to pay for the convenience of being able to skip some of the road walking sections. I wanted to start off with those positive aspects because in my opinion the road walking sections just form part of what Te Araroa is. But as everybody knows, there are some pretty big negative aspects to the road walking as well, not least of which is the fact that road walking can be incredibly painful, especially in those first few weeks of being on the trail. At this point in time, your body is still getting used to walking a certain distance every day. It's still getting used to carrying a certain weight on your back and just in general being on the go all the time. Throw in the fact that the first 4 days you're on the trail you spend walking along 90 Mile Beach, which in and of itself is a pretty hard and compacted surface to walk along, and you can start to see why in the first couple of weeks a lot of hikers end up having to take 0 days or multiple 0 days due to injuries. And of course the biggest reason why you might experience pain on these sections is because you're constantly walking on a very hard and compact surface. And this is regardless of whether or not the road you're walking along is sealed, or more commonly whether it's unsealed, which is generally just a dirt road with a little bit of gravel thrown over the top. That repetitive motion of your feet hitting that very hard surface on a regular basis and over a long distance can lead to all sorts of injuries, not least of which bruising of the ball under your feet, and in a lot of people it can lead to very serious blisters. And in fact this is one of the biggest reasons why I'm so glad I did decide to go with trail runners over boots when I was hiking Te Araroa, because I noticed a lot of the people who were wearing boots were struggling with feet issues on those road walking sections right at the start of the trail. One of the other things that constant repetitive motion on hard ground can cause is shin splints, and that is something else that I suffered with in those first 4 to 6 weeks on the trail. Eventually I found that these shin splints did subside over time, but it was still a pain that I had to work through every day on the trail for a substantial portion of that first part of the trail. And finally, on the injury side of things, one of the things that a lot of people don't even think about when they're thinking about road walking sections is that most roads have a gentle camber, which means that they fall away at the side. When you're walking along a road like that, and especially especially if you have a lot of traffic on that road, you're supposed to be walking down one side of the road, and that means you are constantly walking right on the edge of that camber. That means that you're putting more pressure on one of your legs than you are putting on the other, and that can lead to all sorts of other problems, not least of which may be IT band or hip problems. Again, I suffered a little bit with this myself on the trail, and I did find that it came right eventually. For me, it was the pain of walking on those road sections that was the worst to deal with, but of course there are other things about road walking that make them pretty bad as well. And this includes the fact that, generally speaking, there is very low visibility on the road in terms of drivers being able to see hikers on them. Now, even though I will admit that a lot of the road walking sections on the North Island are along backcountry roads that aren't very highly trafficked, you still need to make an effort to make sure that you are as visible as you can be to drivers that might be using that road. It's amazing how much difference throwing something like a high visibility vest over the back of your pack can make, and this is something that the Te Araroa Trust in particular recommends that all hikers on Te Araroa do. Now, this is more a case of do as I say and not as I do, because this is not a practice that I actively followed. I'm relatively confident with the New Zealand road conditions, and being a Kiwi I understand how most Kiwis drive, so I took extra precautions in other ways that meant that I felt I was quite safe on the roads. But there were a few sections where I feel having a high visibility vest or something reflective either on my front or on my back or on both would have made me just that little bit safer. You can pick them up relatively cheaply here in New Zealand. In fact, most $2 shops stock them, and even if you are a bit of a weight freak like I am, they really don't weigh very much at all. And finally, one of the worst things about hiking along the road in New Zealand, regardless whether it's a backcountry road or a main road, is the Kiwi driving habits. Probably this is best illustrated by way of example. So you might remember that after I'd come off 90 Mile Beach, I decided to skip the Northern Forest section and pick up the trail at Kirikiri. But when I got to Kirikiri, I wanted to get to a certain place on the trail so that I could continue my journey from there, and that involved walking along a busy state highway. Now, most highways or major roads in New Zealand typically have a very large paved verge that you could walk in between the white line, which denotes the edge of the actual road, and then the grass, which starts the verge on the other side. Now, to any other hiker, this might look like a great place to walk because after all, it's not in the main line of traffic. Generally, there's always plenty of room so that you've still got a good meter's worth of distance between you and the car as it comes past, and it means that you don't have to walk along that annoying uneven terrain on the side of the road on the grass verge. But what international hikers don't realise is that Kiwi drivers don't tend to pay much attention to that hard white line on the left hand side of the road, and especially when they are going round corners. I can't stress enough that it is very common for Kiwi drivers to cut the corner where there is that substantial sealed shoulder on the side of the road between the white line and the grass verge. And if you just happen to be walking along that verge in the corner on the inside of the bend and a car comes around the corner and cuts it, you're basically toast. Now, in those situations, I usually took one of two alternatives. The first one was to just get right off of the road onto the grass verge in case a car came around the corner and came straight at me, but sometimes that wasn't always possible because there might have been a barrier there and then a very steep drop off. So in that case, I would actually cross the corner at least 100 meters before that corner and start hiking on the opposite side of the road. Of course, this isn't ideal either because you really should be hiking into the traffic rather than in line with the traffic. But I'd rather take my chances with a car hitting me from behind than I would a car definitely hitting me from in front. So that kind of leads nicely into my tips and tricks for how you can hike safely on those road sections of Te Araroa. So first and foremost, especially for our international hikers, Kiwis drive on the left hand side of the road, which means that you should be walking on the right hand side of the road and into the oncoming traffic. The reason for this is so that you can easily see any traffic that is heading straight towards you, and as that traffic is the closest to you on the road, that's the one that you want to be able to keep your eyes on. Also, generally it makes it a lot easier for the drivers who are actually driving towards you. They're probably more likely to see you and be able to do something about it if they're driving towards you as opposed to if they're coming up behind you. Secondly, as I mentioned, you want to make sure that you are as visible as you can be on the road, and that means wearing some kind of bright clothing, or at least making sure that you can be seen easily when somebody is approaching you from either in front or behind. So as I said before, I personally didn't end up picking up a high visibility vest. In hindsight, I probably should have, but most of the time if I was hiking on the road, I was either wearing my very bright pink hiking shirt that you will have seen in my videos, or I was wearing my rain jacket, which is a very bright blue. The important thing about those two colours is that they are not naturally colours that you would find in and around the road environment, and so it meant that I could stand out very easily to a driver that was either approaching me from in front or behind. What you should not be doing is hiking along those road sections in your long black leggings and your long black thermal top because you're trying to protect yourself from the sun, with your lovely black backpack on and maybe with your dark coloured hair tied up or just let loose behind you, because it's going to be incredibly difficult for any driver to distinguish you from some of the other surroundings on the road. Also, you want to make sure that you are aware of your surroundings when you are on those road sections, and unfortunately people, that means getting rid of one or probably even both headphones when you're on these sections. It's amazing how much of a difference it can make to just be aware and listening for cars when you're on those sections, and in most cases, because they are gravel road, you're able to hear cars a long time before they actually get to you, and you're able to take evasive action or just get off the road if you need to. I've already mentioned that you do want to be particularly careful on the corners or the bends in the road, and unfortunately there are quite a lot of those on the road walking sections. If it is a particularly windy section and there's basically no shoulder to walk on, then you want to make sure that you are crossing the road onto the outside of the corner to give you as much visibility around that corner as possible. But just be wary that in that case you are going to be on the wrong side of the road, and you are going to have to be more vigilant about watching out for traffic that is coming from behind you. And finally, something that is pretty obvious but you'd be surprised at how often it doesn't happen, is that you should make sure if you are on the road that you are walking single file. Now of course there are going to be sections of road that are incredibly quiet. You might not see a car for half an hour or even an hour or more, and in those circumstances of course it's okay to walk next to or with your hiking partner, but just bear in mind that at any time a car could come out of a driveway not very far down the road, or a logging truck might come up behind you, and you need to be able to move off of the road quickly. This isn't just safer for you, but it's also common courtesy to the other users of the road. So if you are going to walk with 2 or more people in line, try to make sure that you are over to one side of the road or other so that you can get away from the middle of the road as quickly as possible. And if you're walking along a sealed road in particular, and especially on a busy sealed road, you need to make sure you're always walking in single file regardless. So just before I wrap up this video, I wanted to cover off some of the sections of road walking on Te Araroa that I found the most dangerous. These are the ones that I found the most dicey and where I thought I was putting myself at greatest risk of being involved in some sort of an accident. First off, it's the section that is mentioned specifically by the Te Araroa Trust in the trail notes, and that is the section immediately after 90 Mile Beach between Ahipara and Kaitaia. This is a main trunk state highway, and there is a lot of traffic on it, especially over the kind of season that you are going to be hiking or starting your through hike. You are likely to see hundreds of cars on this brief 12-kilometre section of the trail, and there's not a particularly big shoulder to walk on. Luckily enough, there are some trail angels based in and around Ahipara and Kaitaia who are more than happy to give you a ride between those two centres, and in fact I took advantage of this myself when I was doing my through hike. Secondly is the small section of trail alongside State Highway 1 between Mercer and Rangiriri just south of Auckland. This is actually part of the section that I skipped south of Hamilton, and whereas I will be going back to fill it in, at the moment I don't have any personal experience of hiking along that section. The impression that I get from other hikers who did hike it was that it wasn't so much necessarily dangerous, but because it is an incredibly busy state highway, there is a lot of traffic on it, it's just not a pleasant experience. Again, there are ways that you could potentially hitchhike around this section, but just bear in mind that because it is a main state highway and there is quite a lot of traffic because it's just south of Auckland, it might not be easy for drivers to get off of and back onto the road exactly where you want to get on and off of the trail. And finally, by far and away, hands down, the worst road walking experience that I had on Te Araroa was actually in a section that I hadn't really heard anything about until I was on it. And this was the section between Silverdale and Stillwater, just north of Auckland. The road walk out of Silverdale to the next intersection that we had to take was incredibly dangerous, and it's not even a state highway. It was dangerous because there was a lot of traffic on this particular road, and the speed limit on that road was a lot higher. It must have been 70 or 80 kilometers an hour. So the cars are passing very close to you and also at very high speeds. And this progresses into the section into Stillwater along Duck Creek Road. Now this section starts off relatively okay, but the further down the road you get, the more narrow it gets and the more windy it gets, and you have basically nowhere to get off of the road because of steep drops on one side and big hills on the other side. Now this section of road is considered so dangerous by the locals in Stillwater that they have a special message group that they send around a message if and when they see hikers out on the road, and often people will come out to pick people up because they find it incredibly dangerous to be driving on the road if they know that there are hikers out there. I think it's a shame that the locals have to go to that kind of an effort, but unfortunately that's just where the trail is routed, and I think that if you can arrange to skip that section somehow, or perhaps even just arrange to hitchhike down into Stillwater, you'd be helping not only yourself out but also those locals as well. Just before we wrap this up though, I just wanted to mention two other quick things. First and foremost, obviously a lot of this video has covered the North Island section of Te Araroa because that is the section that I have hiked. But in having said that, the North Island is definitely the section where you are going to come across most of your road walking. There are still sections on the South Island which do require road walking, but because of the nature of the South Island and the regions through which those roads go, generally speaking, they're not going to be as busy as the sections on the North Island, and the ones that are, you're only really on the road for a small-ish section anyway. And secondly, I just wanted to note that just because I have given you ideas of sections of road walking that you might want to consider skipping, or in some cases you probably should skip on the North Island, doesn't necessarily mean I am recommending skipping all of the road walking sections. The thing that I would leave you with here is that road walking is just part of what makes Te Araroa the trail that it is. Sure, it's difficult, sure, it's painful and it's annoying and it's all those different things, but without it, Te Araroa just wouldn't be the trail that I've come to know it to be. And I definitely think that if you can hack it, if you can motivate yourself to get through those sections, to walk through the pain, to really embrace and enjoy that experience, you will come to maybe not love the road walking sections, but you'll come to appreciate them as just part of the journey. But for purists, it doesn't mean that Te Araroa Trail is not the right trail for you. Purists can still hike this trail, walk every single kilometre, and be relatively safe about it if you are following the tips in this video. Alright guys, that is it from me on this video about the road walking sections of Te Araroa. It's one of those things that can often be a little bit difficult to plan for, so I hope that it's helped you in your preparations going forward. If you liked this video, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and ding that notification bell. Until next time guys, take care and stay safe out there.